Hello and welcome back to Giant Talk. I'm Roger. Those of you who've tuned in before will know that I'm your friendly giant from There Be Giants, who is the host of this fantastic podcast with great guests and great conversation. And I'm hugely chuffed to welcome back an old friend to the podcast, in that we've been friends for a long time, not that he's old. Brett. So welcome, Brett, from PM2. How are you doing?
Glad to be here and glad to not be old.
Fantastic. So we're going to kick around something today which we both get asked an awful lot, pretty much, I think, every time. Certainly I go into a client. I was with a client last week and they were asking me on my views on this particular subject. And it's the, for some, quite thorny issue of whether OKRs should play any sort of role in relation to reward, performance management, performance evaluation, that whole piece. Okay. So, Brett, I believe you have some views on this. Do you want to share them with the listeners?
Well, sure, but I'm kind of going to state the obvious. And the obvious is where this question about linking OKRs and rewards and recognition comes from is probably John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. And in that book, he makes a number of propositions about the characteristics of OKRs, one of which is they shouldn't be linked to personal performance. And there are many elements of his book that are awesome, but there are many also that don't pass the test of reality. And I think this is one of them where people have blindly accepted it as if it's a doctrine, and it isn't. It's John's opinion. And I've actually had this debate with John many times. It's his opinion. And in some cases, it makes sense. But I think that it can't be taken as an absolute rule to be used in all cases.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that his world in which he lives is Silicon Valley, isn't he? He's one of the most prolific investors in Silicon Valley, where the culture is arguably unique, to anywhere else in the world. Highly experimental. The concept of failure is worn. The number of failures you've had is worn like stripes on your arm, so to speak. So it's a very different proposition, isn't it? Very different environment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, ironically, I'm calling you in today from Silicon Valley, so maybe some of the feng shui stuff will leak through the windows here. But if you think so, this is going to go off in a left branch already. But if you think of when we set stretch targets, our key results as stretch goals, we often think of them in terms of the number as a stretch. But if you could think of it a different way. So within any objective, there's a bunch of stuff that we know. And so often we'll set objectives around an activity that we know all the steps, like we have to hit a sales number or something. But then there's another type of objective where we know some of the steps, but not all of them. So the example is JFK's quote of, we're going to put man on the moon, by the end of the decade. We knew many of the steps. And we knew how to figure out the steps we didn't know, but we didn't know it all. And then you've got objectives that are super stretch. And, I think of our friend Elon Musk, where he talks about, going to Mars. Well, there are very few of those steps we know. But the benefit of that latter type, Elon Musk's, is it's a unifying call, and it causes us to focus our efforts on something to begin figuring out what the steps are that we don't know. Well, if we set those objectives down for an individual, obviously we're going to have a different conversation with people around objectives where we know every step, achieve the sales number, compared to objectives where we know most of the steps, putting humankind on the moon, or an objective that's a super stretch, let's go to Mars. It's a different conversation. It doesn't mean that we don't have a conversation. It has to do with not only what the conversation looks like, but how we accept risk of failure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, that's the archetypal moonshot, isn't it? The lagging measure of success is we actually get to Mars. But the point is that's a beautiful outcome. But people just don't know what the steps are going to be that are going to take us there yet. Some of the technology hasn't even been invented yet.
Right. And I've had this arm wrestle with John as well. I really don't like the moonshot metaphor because because unlike going to Mars, we knew all the steps. We knew that we had to get out of Earth orbit. We knew that we
Yeah.
had to figure out a moon orbit. We knew that we had to figure out how to build a space glove that could work at minus absolute zero, or how to build a launch pad on the moon to take off from. Like, we knew all of those things, and all of them were solvable even at the beginning of the decade. So we knew all the steps and we had ideas about them. Things like, true creativity, things like, and a tangible one is going to Mars, but even stuff beyond that, like, who would have thought that even, I don't know, Chat GPT or cars would self-drive, or, those things at 1900
Mm.
or 1901, people would never have imagined. That's beyond, those objectives that are just dreamscapes, not moonshots, but beyond a moonshot.
Yeah. Go beyond the moonshots. Wow. Okay. Yeah. There's a thought.
And so part of the problem is that we end up in, so this is really going sideways, but often when organizations, we've worked with Google X Labs, and in there, they don't actually set measurable objectives for innovation. As soon as you set a measurable objective for innovation, you've killed all innovation. So no longer am I innovating on that moonshot. I'm coloring inside the space. So true innovation is where you don't have any expectations of the hard deliverable. I'm just going to work in this. So yeah, we've got examples of that, like accidents, like Post-it notes. No one set up the example of the objective of creating glue that I could have on a piece of paper and I'd take off. Like, all those stories of accidental discoveries, penicillin and so forth. If you set up only and funded only measurable outcomes, you limit the degree of creativity. If we take a look at what Toby's done with Shopify, what he's done is sort of limitless creativity, like throwing money at things and just allowing the experiment to occur, and afterwards discovering what things came out of that might be usable going forward. So again, this is a long way from the core topic. The core topic is, think of objectives being ones which are completely block and tackle. We can get that thing done. Some which I know all the steps, I just have to flesh it out, going to the moon, and then ones which are completely stretch goals without any defined steps to get there. Now, when I'm having a performance conversation with an individual about type 1, I know all the steps, and like sales, I'm just going to go get it done. You can see where that's a different conversation than one where I kind of know what the steps are, but I don't know how to get them done, compared to ones where I don't even know what the steps are. So before we get into the gory detail, understand that the objective itself gives you some information about how that conversation might look.
And just one of your points there, which I just would like to just unpack a bit, because I think it does lead into the reward conversation, was you said quite clearly, as soon as you set an OKR for innovation, you kill innovation. Would you not want to set a key result that defines what success looks like if that experimentation has worked?
Well, again, by defining the key result that defines success, you've killed innovation. So now this is where it gets a bit fuzzy. So I think of the multiple generations of iPhone. Now, is that innovation for each next iPhone, or is it just operational excellence? I'm making an existing thing slightly better. So they keep on making the camera better and better and better. Is that innovation, or is that just operational excellence? That's a fuzzy line. And for my definition, I'm just going to say that's operational excellence. That's taking what already exists. Now, before the iPhone existed, that was innovation, right? Out of dirt came this. Now, and it was type 2 objective. In other words, I knew the steps to take. I knew some of the steps, like I knew whatever it is, alligator, crocodile glass existed. I just had to apply it. So I knew the steps. I just didn't know how to make them all happen. So the issue is, I'm talking about type 3, just genuine innovation. As soon as you put a measurable outcome, you've now constrained it to just being operational excellence. I've just taken what already exists and
mm,
taken a step forwards.
You see, that's interesting. I mean, I take a slightly different view because I think taking the iPhone as an example, if we're only classing innovation as that major step change, I think it then disempowers a lot of people because there are, okay, you call it operational excellence improvements and so on and so forth, but my view is anyone can innovate, and that lots of incremental innovations can lead up to quite a sizable gain. And I think there's almost, by saying it's only it only applies to these things that come along once in a generation and are considered a major step change. I find that I think a lot of people can feel quite intimidated by that because they don't see themselves as this great thinker like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, and therefore, oh, I can't innovate. No, it's point. It's that's something that only a very very few people can do, and I'm kind of more on board with, actually, I think everybody has the opportunity to innovate and test.
Well, so we're running on the cusp of an Oxford Debating Society conversation about words. So let me give you this. How about we say, if there's if it's just operational excellence, we're going to call it a tactic. If
Yeah.
there's a degree of uh, change, we're going to call that innovation. And if there are no known steps, we're going to call that creativity. So innovation can. So really, all we're doing in this part of the conversation is debating, where does the line of innovation end, so that
Mm,
people feel inspired to be innovative. But there's got
mm,
to be something that describes what happens when we don't know what the steps are. And again, that's only because when I'm having a conversation with someone and I know roughly what the steps are, like I know I want to make the
yeah.
iPhone better, customers say we need a better camera. You could call that innovation as we move that forward. I'm
Mm,
looking for that huge step change. So right now we think iPhones, we used to think, here's a good example. I'm am that guy that you referred to as being old before. So I remember when there weren't cell phones, those were innovative, right? I remember when there was an iPhone, those were innovative. But at a certain point, it becomes a yawner, like it exists already, nothing new.
yeah.
What's interesting, and we'll have this in our next podcast, I hope, is even all your listeners can know that Google answered all questions 5 years ago. Now Chat GPT's replaced that. Like the
Mm,
idea
mm,
of a
mm,
GPT, that was innovative. Like all the bits and pieces existed, but someone finally managed to figure out how to join those bits and pieces together into a usable tool that any person can interface with. So
yeah.
at a certain point in time, Google was that innovative thing. Now that, so 5 minutes ago, we now have the new innovative thing. And you wouldn't have imagined this happened, 5 or 10 years ago. We can't
Mm,
imagine what the replacement for the iPhone and the iPad is, but there's
mm,
something out there that is truly
yeah.
innovative that's going to, 10 years from now, people are going to go, gosh, you used an iPhone and you thought that was cool. Gosh,
Yeah. Yeah. It's holograms on your wrist or something like that, I
exactly,
should imagine. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
that. So,
So this brings me back to, for me, and I quote my sources here, McGregor and Doshi, who are two researchers into the realm of organizational performance. They wrote a paper a good few years ago, which has been a big influence on the approach that we take to the work we do with clients. And they defined performance as falling into two camps. Okay, the first is tactical performance. So that's the type of performance which organizations, are can measure with their eyes shut, because it requires targets, budgets, quotas, all that good stuff, and that's fine, and it absolutely has its place. But then you've got adaptive performance, and adaptive performance is what organizations really need to grow, to develop, to innovate, and that is about our ability as an organization, as a team, and as individuals to grow and to learn and as a result of that learning, apply what we've learned to and revise our practice, and have this iterative process of growth and progression going on. And this is, coming back to your point that you were just making a few moments ago. It's this sort of, in the area of innovation, it's this adaptive performance, which I think is something which is so vital, no matter whether you're an accountancy practice that does, the same type of work, the same type for the same clients year in, year out, or whether you're a software developer that is, that's developing the next thing to replace GPT. You need to have a level of adaptive performance in your business. Otherwise, you just stagnate and die these days because the pace is so fast. So when it comes down to, defining the type of performance which we want to see in our people, certainly the way I and my team kind of coach and advise our clients is to think of it in terms of those two definitions.
Yeah, so that's slightly different, but a good lens to look at. It's funny how you and I can read the same paper and I read something different into it. So what I read is that the magic of OKRs is they are 100% adaptive performance because we're defining the outcome.
Oh, they should be. Yeah.
So even if I set an objective for something that's tactical, like closing trouble tickets or answering helpline calls or closing a sales transaction, in theory, it's tactical. Back to my example of that's a type 1 objective where I know all the steps and I just have to. But what we're trying to do with OKRs is move away from a job description where I tell you step by step what you need to do. Now, job descriptions might work if you're cooking a hamburger at McDonald's or something like that, where it's a defined step, right? It's complex, or it's complicated, not complex. But most of our jobs are complex, and therefore having a job description doesn't work. And the magic of OKRs is once I describe the outcome, even for something like closing a trouble ticket, it allows the creativity of the individual to shine through. So if your objective is to make sure that we close every trouble ticket on first contact, in other words, fix it right the first time, that allows me, and maybe I solve that by getting on a Zoom call with a person. Maybe you solve it by taking them through a checklist. Maybe someone else solves it by emailing them the checklist and having them walk through it. So long as they live within our values when they accomplish those activities and get the right outcome, that's what we're aiming for in OKRs. So I'm going to argue they're all, having read that paper, they're all adaptive performance. I'm not
100%, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. We always advocate that OKRs work best when used for transformational activity. Activity that is going to take the business forward, take the organization forward, not for repetitive activity. Any mention of maintain in OKRs is usually not a great sign. And this is where we have the distinction between the adaptive performance being kind of, I guess, evaluated, you might say, through OKRs, and then the tactical performance being more in the realm of regular KPIs that are running to where they want to, where they need to be, and hitting target. Although there was an interesting challenge recently, and sorry to just go on, but I think it's worth just adding in, where a client said, okay, so get this, absolutely agree. Where do we categorize, where do we put regular operational improvement, which is part of business as usual, where we always expect our operations to improve by, X% each year, efficiency or productivity or whatever. It's not a big, hairy, audacious goal that warrants a full transformation program. So it might not actually fall within the transformation OKRs, but what happens there?
Well, I'm
And
waiting with bated breath for your answer because I was going to ask you exactly the same question. So, and the answer is,
the answer is you do still use OKRs for it. That was the guidance that we gave to the client, and it worked. It worked for them.
yeah. So
Um,
my phrase around the same thing. I was hoping you're going to fall into a trap, my friend, but you didn't. So, yeah, in different dimensionality of objectives, if we have run the business and change the business, run the business or the
yeah,
day-to-day activities, change the business. Many
yeah,
people make the mistake of only looking at the change the business because that's big and
yeah,
exciting, and there's many reasons. I can list the reasons why we do that. The dilemma is, if you do it, you disenfranchise the 80% of the organization that work on keeping the lights on, that do those day-to-day activities. And the
mm,
OKR system quickly fails because people go, gosh, this is only for senior management and those people working on projects. It
mm,
doesn't help me feel connected to purpose. It doesn't help me recognize the contribution I'm making or let my boss see the value I'm doing. And so, and of course, in any business, if you don't keep the lights on, you don't have the money to change the business anyways. So
correct.
now, to embellish that, just right here in Silicon Valley, it's 80% change the business, 20% run the business. When we
Mm,
work with clients like Bank of America, they're the opposite. They're 98% run the business, 2% change the business. And that's fine. It doesn't mean the OKRs are in proportion. So it doesn't mean that in Bank of America, 98% are run the business. I just need to have enough that I have my finger on the pulse of the run the business activities. Or I just need to have enough that I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of change the business. So don't think that the mix of run the business versus change the business dictates the mix of your OKRs.
yeah, I think that's a really important point to mention. God, we've really gone around the houses on this. We're supposed to be talking about performance
We
evaluation.
are, but we are, and the it many people on the performance evaluation, and we'll get to it eventually. The elephant in the room is, are people going to game the numbers? And we're going to get to that eventually. But these
Mm,
other aspects are lingering immediately below the surface. As soon as you solve the game the number question, these other questions come up. So about stretch goals, about tactical versus change the business. So these all fit into context. It might be in the wrong sequence for what your listeners' brains have, but
mm.
they surface themselves the second you deal with the gaming question.
Yeah. So the gaming question: could people? I suppose there's gaming from two perspectives off the top of my head. There's the sandbagging that people might decide actually just to, you know, only sign up to something that's dead easy and really achievable because they know they'll get the bonus that way. And then the other is actually they just do something to kind of create the illusion that they're achieving the numbers when in fact that's not the case. Um, my sense is transparency certainly helps with the latter. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the first point.
Well, so in a mechanical sense, it's easy to solve, and we can double click on that in a second. But I'm going to go to what I think is a compelling argument, and that is the root cause of someone doing either of those gaming the target or gaming the performance, is a
Mm.
cultural issue. If
Yeah,
your business has set itself up so that people think that cheating is the way to success, you have to solve that, because you can never create enough structure in any system, let alone OKRs, to combat that culture. I mean, the issue is people are far too creative. And again, these are complex problems, not complicated. Complicated problems, assembling a car, I can solve with standard operating procedures. Complex problems, I have to just give guidelines and guardrails and allow people to work autonomously inside that scope. OKRs are in the latter world. They're about solving complex problems, which is any knowledge creating business. And we can't do that by having more and more standard operating procedures to limit the gamification. What I need to do is address the root cause, which is a culture in which people think that's the right behavior.
yeah, I completely agree. There is a cultural issue if people want to cheat.
Right.
Definitely.
And I don't think it's that hard to fix. gosh, how long have we known each other? 10 years, 20 years? Anyways,
Something.
way back when, the indicator I used to use for my business was my cell phone. I recognized that my cell phone minutes equated to business 2 months in the future. So all I have to do is track cell phone minutes, and I can pretty accurately predict how many consultants I need in the future. Now, if my consultants chose to game that number, they called up their sweeties and their parents and their buddies to drive up the phone number, I would look at that key result and go, gosh, I don't need to work on selling any more work because we're going to have so much we don't know what to do with it. I'm going to throttle back. 2 months in the future, all of a sudden we have no work to do because someone gamed the number. So it's easy to help people understand that gaming the number doesn't help us win. But we often think evil of people and try to solve the problem by putting in more guardrails as opposed to explaining the system.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I think the way some systems can be set up is that it perhaps allows the individual who's gaming to achieve some sort of short-term gain. And I'm thinking in particular of a few salespeople that I've worked with over the years who, got themselves a nice fat commission payment and then headed for the door before the skeletons came out of the
Well,
closet.
now look who's the old man. You could not possibly make that work in today's world, right? So
No, you're
let's
kidding.
say I falsify my revenue. Well, the next day I'd expect to see more, helpline calls, like depending what business you're in, like more orders on the shop floor or more helpline calls, more accounting transactions going out the door. And then a couple of days later, I'd expect to see the next step in the process occur. Because our systems are so interconnected, I can't game my sales number and not see the impact of that almost immediately in the downstream processes. So the idea of gaming the number only worked when I had silo processes that did not link to each other. And so you're the Luddite here, buddy. That does not exist anymore. There's nowhere in the galaxy I know of where the processes are so dissociated. I could actually not only go through the quarter, but get my commission check and happily go. Now, back when I had hair, and maybe when you had hair too. Oh, I forgot. This is a podcast. They don't know that. There's no possible way that in the old days people could do that. There's no possible way that can happen now.
Yeah, which is the transparency side of things. And all right, you're talking about transparency around the interconnectedness of systems nowadays.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the transparency that OKRs provides, but OKRs certainly plays into that.
Well,
it certainly complements that.
But we should have shared objectives or shared key results, right? What does that mean? It means that the salesperson shouldn't get recognized just for doing a sale. We all have stories of where salespeople have sold stuff that operations just cannot execute, right? Whether that's a software contract or manufacturing something. So let's have a shared key result so that sales is inclined to. So what we've noticed is many sales teams, they've got their leaderboards and they encourage individual performance. As a generalization, I've never seen a marketing team that wants to encourage individual performance. Every single marketing team, all those OKRs are about encouraging multiple departments to be in their meetings, multiple departments being part of the decision-making process. So we can actually use the OKRs to help satisfy that possibility of people gaming for individual benefit by forcing us to work as a team. Now, the run-on sentence from there is about, John's statement of you should use OKRs down to the individual level. 99.9% of my clients are trying to encourage teamwork, not individual performance. So don't go to the individual level, only go to the team level. That way, if I see someone is lagging, I'm encouraged to go help them out, figure out what I can do to help them go forward.
I have never, ever seen OKRs down to individual level work. I've never seen that. Not that we've tried to do it with clients, but clients have often asked us in when they've tried to do it for themselves, and it's just caused an absolute beast of an OKR structure.
Yeah,
and so it becomes everything that they set out with the intentions of it avoiding. In other words, some sort of bureaucratic beast,
right,
which has to be realigned every quarter.
So I think we've pummeled that poor pony about falsifying your outcomes. Let's talk about the other side of gamification, which is gaming the target. Now, same issue. I would only game the target if there was a reward for successfully, overachieving. Now, part of how I see OKRs as a performance conversation is just that, it's a performance conversation. You may have knocked, using American metaphors, you may have knocked your sales number out of the ballpark. But it turns out that, in what's that expression? A high tide rises all ships. If you're in a booming economy,
Yeah.
maybe doing 100% of target is not good enough. That's only a mediocre performance. And maybe, in uncertain times of recession, doing 50% of target is awesome. So all these target numbers are just informing the conversation. Now, the trick is we need way more skilled leaders having those performance conversations, because it's not just by rote, you did 120%, you get 120% of your compensation model.
No, I agree. I think that's a really important point, that the context matters hugely when you're setting a target.
Yeah,
Hugely.
and so the only way that I could win by gaming the number is if in a crazy world somehow, I can't imagine it happening these days, but in a crazy world, we set the target in January, and by March we assumed that was written on a stone tablet, and that was absolutely the number, and like that. There's got to be a conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to sort of go a bit sideways here for a second, because I think that point has now been flogged to death. I want to talk about what a good compensation model looks like. So traditionally, in a good compensation model, if I have a formula-based reward system, so you get a percentage of EBITDA at the end of the period, the criteria has to be that it's a lagging measure that you can audit. In other words, in a traditional compensation system, if I look at the same system, you look at it and come to a different conclusion, that is not going to work in a compensation model, because it's what I call an unfair game. I can, as a boss, I can tilt the table any way I want. The fair game is when I understand what the target is. It's an auditable number. You look at the process, I look at the process, we came up with the same number. And then secondly, it usually therefore is a lagging measure. It has to do with something that you actually achieved as opposed to a leading measure.
Yeah.
So I want to dig into both of those for a second. So the idea of it being a fair game, that you look at it and I look at it, seems to go in the face of a stretch goal, because a stretch goal is you just make up a number. So in that world, what we tend to say is, for your stretch goal, let's think of best possible. So I'm sitting here in downtown San Francisco. To get out to Apple is going to take me about an hour and a half of a drive right now, because it's just heading towards rush hour. But if I went there at 2:00 in the morning, I could get there in about 20 minutes. So the best possible is 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm using the same car, my same competency, the same assets, road, street signs, same guidelines. But I'd have to go at 2:00 in the morning. So, but it's a fair game, because if you looked at the best possible and I looked at the best possible, we come up with the same number.
Yeah.
So it's a stretch goal. Now, I'm not going to get up at 2:00 in the morning, but now I can use my autonomy and creativity to solve the puzzle. Maybe I choose to go at 6:00 in the morning and do my workout down in San Jose as opposed to up here. Or maybe I choose to work from the hotel till 10:00 in the morning and it's not as busy. It's still going to take me an hour, but it's not an hour and a half. So now I have the autonomy to make decisions, so long as I live within our values, to get better performance. So on the first part of having that auditable outcome, but accommodating stretch goals, ideas like this best possible as the goal is an approach to tackle that issue.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. It's So you're proposing that it's the best possible, or the key result that's set at that particular threshold, which reward is calculated against.
Right. So if I loop back to the beginning of our conversation, that's what I call a type 2 objective. I know all
Yeah.
the steps, right? Get in the car, get my coffee, drive down. Like I know all the steps. Now it's a matter of, with autonomy, how do I optimize around my competencies, my life, my personal life balance, all those things to get the best possible outcome. Now the
Yeah.
conversation with my boss about that is about the skill set, the creativity I used to optimize that equation. So
Mm.
boss sets the goal of 20 minutes, I come in at an hour. We don't have a debate about whether it should have been 58 minutes or 57 minutes. We go, well, that's interesting. So, what worked, what's to learn forward? What did you do that really worked and you can build on? What did you learn that didn't work that we should throttle back on? And now I can coach you for the next quarter. Based on what we learned, the 20 minutes is still what that target looks like. It's completely unachievable unless you go at 2:00 in the morning. But based on what you want to do, how about we pay for your club membership down here in San Jose?
Mm.
I go, oh, that's interesting. So that means I can get up earlier, do my workout down there. Or, what if? And so now it's a conversation between the organization and the individual
Mm.
based on the concept of best possible and, where is the benefit equation for the business and the individual? What is the fair game?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The second part that I said was that yeah, the idea of it being auditable. In other words, it's a lagging measure.
Mm.
So the dilemma with leading and lagging measures, and as you know, my background is I helped write the books that came up with that concept of the balanced scorecard back in Harvard. The
Mm.
dilemma is anytime I think of a leading and lagging measure, I've created silos in the organization, right? Sales lagging measure, did they actually close the sale, is the leading measure for the next step of the process.
Mm.
So as soon as I have leading and lagging measures, by definition, I've bifurcated the organization. So in the reward and recognition realm, we need to make sure, I call them a shared objective or shared key result before. You could describe them as they should be cross-functional. In other words, let's
Yeah.
get over these artificial lead lag barriers because they're naturally creating a competitive environment in the organization. What if we were aligned? What if we said we want to do everything we can to optimize the order to cash cycle? So the order to cash cycle includes every single department in the organization. How can we shorten that as much as possible? And maybe I can shorten it as much as possible by spending more time with the customer up front and getting the detailed design done correctly so that my sprints are more focused and the story points are aligned and so forth. Or maybe I can do it far better by bringing operations earlier in the sales process. Like there are many
Yeah.
ways to optimize that equation. What we're trying to do with OKRs is that adaptive performance, which is saying, what is the big picture and how can we adapt the organization around what I call both pillars and anchors. So pillars are things you can't move. If you move those things, a building falls over. Anchors are things that you've arbitrarily dropped in the water. You can just lift up and move. So
Yeah.
let's figure out where are the pillars and anchors within that shared objective. And then all of a sudden, we've got a different opportunity to optimize the equation.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really key point, and it's something you mentioned that 99% of your clients want to use them for team rather than individual. I would actually go further to say that I think 99% of our clients, and this may well be the case for yours, actually not just want to use them for team, but want to use them for cross-functional team.
Yeah.
Because the silofication, if that's a phrase, if it isn't, I'm going to trademark it. Is just endemic in organisations, which is remarkable considering that there is so much technology available now to help us all collaborate. but there are still challenges. There are still barriers in place.
Right.
And
so,
sorry, I was just going to say, and I think a lot of that is probably down to the way that budgets are put together. But please go on.
well, you could throw rocks at many different places. If I think of football, or what people over here in America would call soccer, the beautiful sport is all about the harmony between the departments. The goalie department works with defense, works with midfield, works with forwards, and we all figure out how to work within our job function, but work harmoniously as a team. So it's immensely doable. So therefore, any reason when it doesn't occur has to be because of incorrect guidelines in the organization. And I believe, and you might as well, that OKRs solve that problem.
Yeah. So long as they're designed well, so long as they're used with, this is something that we do with clients, and we have to temper sometimes a client's desire to get going with writing their OKRs with actually, just give us a few minutes to let's work out how you're going to use them once you've got them, because just having them doesn't change the world.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think we've sort of touched on all the major topics associated with it. Each one could almost be a podcast in itself. So it'd be interesting to see what feedback you get back from this conversation, to see whether there's value in us drilling into each of these concepts in more detail, because both you and I have many more layers of answers behind each one of these concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Brett, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. It's always good to go toe-to-toe with you.
We're back to silos again. What you meant to say, it's always good to develop this shared knowledge going forward.
Well, yeah, which we get through discussion and debate, which is great.
Thank you, Socrates.
So thank you for tuning in to Giant Talk. Hope you've really enjoyed this episode as much as we have, and that it's perhaps answered a few questions for you around the thorny issue of rewards and OKRs. I dare say you might even have a few more questions that have come up. You know how to get hold of me. You can find me at There Be Giants. Brett, how can people get hold of you?
Easiest way is to get hold of me through you.
Oh, okay. All right. Fine. Fair enough. And I know where to reach you. So, okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I've enjoyed this chit-chat.
No problem. And you enjoy your time in San Francisco.
I'll do my best.